Okay, another new semester, fall 2021, and this time, last semester was 3D animation, this time 3D modeling using the old trusty Cinema 4D. This is kind of an intro video, but I'm not going to start with an intro. Here's how to move and rotate and that kind of stuff. We're going to cover that in class, and people get the hang of that stuff pretty quickly. But we won't go too quickly because we want to get used to coordinate systems and that kind of stuff. But before I go too far, I want to just explain the roadmap for this series of tutorials and where they might be going. Just give a quick example of how we'll make the first leap, the first assignment, I guess. So I've created, because I love to do these little maps and things, it's the way I help organize my life. Mainly my administrative director of the School of Art Life, but this helps me even with our class here. So I have this little chart that says simple primitive, and then we move on to the complex simple with volume, primitive to polygons, and then complex polygons. So I guess the idea is here in an introductory course with 3D, a good place to start is, at least for me, is for students to create a still life using these primitive objects, right? This cube, cylinder, capsule, tube, or a sphere, and there's a bunch of other primitive objects, and I'm going to talk about those here in a second. So I want to get used to this idea of what these primitive prepackaged pieces of geometry allow us to do and how they're usable in a variety of different ways in any part of the stack here, right? I could just use a cube to just use a cube for some reason. And we're going to try this kind of novel, kind of Boolean volume building approach. A few years ago, maybe this wouldn't be the best thing to do, the way that the algorithms kind of assembled the geometry afterwards. But several versions ago, I want to say version 19 or 20, 21, Cinema 4D came out with these volume builder tools. And since I've just recently got back into Cinema 4D, I checked these out. I thought this is a pretty good way to go. I'll show an example here of this. But the whole idea is I'm not going to change. I'll change, the length of this or how big the opening is, but I'm not going to make these editable so that I can select individual points or edges or polygons and build and cut and extrude new pieces, right? I'm just going to I'm going to make something using just these primitives, shaping them, their length and width and height and those kind of things and their radius and that. But I am not going to edit them in any other way. I mean, I certainly could, right? But that's not the point here. So I'm going to try to make something complex out of that. I'll show an example here in a second. And later on, after we get used to the idea of using these primitives, moving them around, organizing them in hierarchies, how do I deal with their coordinate system? How do I change, the number of segments that they have on them or modify their shape in such a way to construct something? How would I, again, use these primitives, but start to convert them into raw polygon objects that I could start building and welding and extruding onto, right? And there's a whole bunch of things in that third state that will get added, generators, splines, things like that. So that'll be an assignment afterwards. We're going to build a little room. And then the last one is this complex polygons, right? So edge loop modeling. So how do I make more organic looking shapes by starting maybe with a primitive and then making it edible and start sculpting and tugging and pulling on the components of it to make these shapes. And my idea with the last project that we'll do with that is that you could use a blend of this volume modeling paradigm along with this edge loop or polygon box modeling paradigm, right? Blah, 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 blah. How many minutes? Oh my God, almost 5 minutes of just that stuff. But this is all very important for the setup of these, the next tutorial. So before I do this, so just to give an example, so I've created these objects I have the, in the display here, I've got the grout shading lines turned on. NA and NB are the hotkeys here, right? So I can just toggle that stuff back. Oops, NB. So I can see what the structure is. And we're going to come back to this in a minute. But before I end this tutorial, again, the whole idea from my simple primitives to a complex shape is, if I move on to something that I did last night. Right, so this is a shape that I don't know, I was just trying to be something that was mechanical, and I used a whole series of these volume builders, but they're all filled with just primitives, right? All these are still in their little pre-packaged form. You can see their icon. So I haven't done make edit, right? These are all still in that format. Let me fold all these back up. The only little caveat to that is on one of them, because I couldn't help myself, I used a capsule and I put it into a cloner, and that's actually how I got these little cuts in there. I created one that made that right kind of cut, and then I used a cloner to make duplicates around in a radial array, right, to make that cut. And we'll just turn that little render on here. So I have a couple lights, but you can see this is a very interesting shape. It's probably rendering a little slow because I'm doing screen capture at the same time, but I mean, it has this nice mechanical feel. It has these nice beveled edges. We're getting a lot of nice light and reflections. And again, this is just the screen preview. It's not really a final render. But all of this was created and built using only primitives and volume building. Now, if you're a more advanced user, you might be like, oh my God, if I had to UV map this, or if I had to, if I was trying to get really clean reflections, that would be problematic, right? There might be some issues, but for our need here, and what a great way to kind of just start building out ideas, right? Just put pieces together and cutting and chopping and just using these objects. What a great way to get started and build up some concept art. And there are some excellent workflows after this where I could use a low poly mesh and bake textures onto it or something like that if I was doing a game, something for games and that. So certainly not a perfect format all the time, but this is a great way to get started with how to position these simple primitive objects in various groupings to create these complex final forms. So that's what we're going to try to do here in a minute with the next series of tutorials. We'll just try to make a few fancy fun shapes. Okay, I'm going to call that the end of tutorial number 1. There will certainly be many, many tutorials after this for 3D modeling and Cinema 4D.